Mafia boss receives a call from poor Waitress at 2 a.m. Your daughter is shivering in the rain. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10.0, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The rain hammered against the greasy windows of Rosie's diner like 1,000 tiny fists. Each droplet caught the red neon glow of the open 24 hours sign, turning it into something almost beautiful. Almost. But nothing in Southside Chicago stayed beautiful for long. Grace Sullivan wiped down the same spot on the counter for the third time. Her worn cloth leaving streaks instead of cleaning them. Her fingers were pruned from hours of dishwater and coffee spills. It was nearly midnight and the diner reeked of burnt coffee, rancid grease, and the desperation that clung to everyone who walked through those doors at this late hour. Her feet ached in her cheap sneakers, the ones with soles peeling away from the canvas. She had been on shift since 2 o'clock in the afternoon, pulling a double because Sarah called in sick again. And Frank, her manager, did not care that she had already worked 6 days straight, that tomorrow morning she had to wake up at 4 to deliver food. He just grunted and told her table 4 needed more ketchup. Grace was invisible here. Just another 27-year-old waitress in a stained apron. Another gaunt face serving eggs and bacon to truckers and insomniacs who never really looked at her. They looked through her, past her, around her. The phone in her pocket buzzed. A message from the hospital. Lily Sullivan's bill is overdue. Please pay $15,000 by Friday or the patient will be transferred. Grace deleted the message with trembling fingers. $15,000. She made $280 this week. Rent was $600. And Lily, her foster sister, the only family she had found and claimed as her own in the years after the fire, was slowly dying in the hospital from kidney failure. Her dreams of art school and a different life had been buried long ago. Under $180,000 of student debt she would never pay off. Under sleepless nights, under meals of nothing but instant noodles and diner leftovers, the bell above the door chimed, letting in a gust of wet wind that cut through skin. Grace did not look up immediately. She had learned not to seem too eager, too desperate for tips. But something made the air in the diner change. It got heavier, thicker, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. When she finally glanced toward the door, she saw him. He did not belong here. That was the first thought that crossed Grace's mind. He wore a black cashmere coat, the kind that probably cost more than she made in an entire year. The fabric was so fine it seemed to repel the rain rather than absorb it. Water beaded on his shoulders like diamonds. His handcrafted leather shoes clicked against the cracked linoleum, reflecting the fluorescent lights as he moved. But it was not his clothes that made Grace's breath catch. It was the way he carried himself, like he owned not just the room, but the very air they breathed. 2 men flanked him. Both built like brick walls, their eyes constantly scanning the diner's interior. One touched his ear, an earpiece she realized, and murmured something too low to hear. The man in the middle did not look at them. He, clears throat, did not need to. They moved around him like satellites orbiting a planet. And Grace understood in that moment that she was looking at someone dangerous. His face was all sharp angles and deep dark eyes that seemed to catch and hold the light in a way that made her stomach twist. There was a faint scar running from his temple down to his left cheekbone, not diminishing, but adding to his fearsome presence. Mid-30s, with the kind of presence that made everyone in the diner suddenly find their coffee cups fascinating. Even Frank, who never shut up, went quiet behind the grill. Grace should have looked away, should have focused on wiping down her section, refilling the sugar dispensers, anything but him. But she could not. And then those dark eyes found hers across the diner and she felt pinned like a butterfly under glass. He moved toward the counter toward her and Grace could smell him as he got closer. Expensive cologne, something with notes of sandalwood and smoke mixing with the rain on his coat. It did not belong with the smell of burnt coffee and old grease. Nothing about him belonged here. Coffee. His voice was low and rough with an accent that rolled the vowels in a way that made the simple word sound like a command. Italian, Grace thought, black. Her hands shook as she reached for the pot, and she hated herself for it. She had served hundreds of customers, thousands maybe, but none of them had made her pulse race like this, made her feel like she was standing too close to a fire. He left a $100 bill for a $3 cup of coffee, not allowing her to refuse. Then he left, leaving behind a black business card with gold lettering. No name, just a phone number. They were almost at the door when Grace heard it. A small pathetic sound that did not belong to the rumble of thunder or the drum of rain. A whimper. A child's whimper. Grace moved without thinking, slipping out from behind the counter and peering through the straw. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the parking lot into a small lake. And there, huddled beside a black SUV with tinted windows, was a little girl. She could not have been more than 5 or 6 years old, wearing a soaked pink dress that clung to her tiny frame. Her curly dark hair was plastered to her head, and she was shaking so violently Grace could see it even from inside. Her lips looked blue in the neon light, and her eyes, wide and terrified, stared at nothing. The dangerous man and his guards were already outside, not seeing her, moving toward a black Mercedes. They were leaving. They were leaving, and that little girl was going to freeze to death in the rain. Grace ran outside, letting the rain slap her face. But the Mercedes had already pulled away, its tail lights bleeding red into the darkness. She turned back to look at the little girl, those big dark eyes found hers. The child's lips moving, trying to form words that would not come. She was in shock, severe shock, and completely alone. Grace's hands trembled as she held the black business card. The phone number with an Italian country code glittered under the neon light. She did not know that the call she was about to make would change her life forever. In that breathless moment, just before the story unfolds any further. If you are listening to this right now, take a single heartbeat to subscribe to the channel. To like and to share so we can continue bringing you stories filled with emotion every day. Those small gestures are the quiet sparks that keep our storytelling flame alive. And wherever you are in the world, leave a comment below and tell us where you are listening from. Chicago, California, Texas, or perhaps a small town wrapped in cold night air. We want to know from which corner of the world this story has found its way into your heart. Grace did not allow herself a single second more to think. She ran outside, the rain striking her face like a whip, soaking her from head to toe in only a few steps. She knelt beside the little girl, and when her fingers touched the child's icy skin, her heart tightened, cold as stone. How long had this little girl been out in the rain? Grace said nothing. She slid her arms beneath the trembling small body and lifted her. The girl was frighteningly light, as if she were no more than a fallen baby bird. Her large dark eyes remained wide open, staring into nothing, unblinking, tearless, with only those blue-tinted lips shivering uncontrollably. Grace held her tight against her chest and ran back into the diner, rainwater pooling across the cracked tile floor. Frank stood behind the counter, his face flushed with anger. "What did you just drag in here?" he shouted. "This is a diner, not a charity ward. Get her out." Grace did not look at him. She walked straight into the staff room in the back where an old heater hummed and a few clean towels were stacked on a shelf. Frank was still yelling something about rules and liability, but his voice became nothing more than the buzzing of a fly against her ear. Nothing mattered except the child freezing in her arms. She set the girl on the worn chair and gently began removing the soaked pink dress. Her hands shook, but she forced them to move slowly, carefully, as if she were touching something fragile enough to break beneath a breath. When the dress came off, Grace froze. Along the girl's tiny arm, just below the elbow were clear bruises shaped like fingers. Someone had grabbed her hard. Rage surged in Grace's chest, but she swallowed it. Not now. She wrapped the towel around the small body and pulled the girl back into her arms, using her own warmth to chase away the cold closing around the child. The girl did not react, did not cry, did not speak. She only trembled. "Sweetheart," Grace whispered. Her voice softer than breath. "I am here. I will not let anyone hurt you again." No response, only the faint breaths and the frantic heartbeat that Grace could feel fluttering through the towel. This child needed more than a warm cloth and the arms of a broke waitress. She needed her person. Grace reached into her apron and took out the black business card. The numbers glimmered beneath the dim yellow light. She drew in a long breath and dialed the digits on the old landline phone. 1 ring, 2 rings. Then someone picked up. Silence. No greeting. No question. Only a heavy stillness that felt like waiting. Grace swallowed. "I found a little girl," she said, her voice shaking more than she wished. "Outside the black SUV in the parking lot at Rosie's diner. She is shivering and she cannot speak. I think she is in severe shock." The silence stretched for a full breath. Then a voice came through. The same deep Italian-toned voice she had heard not 10 minutes earlier. Yet now it was entirely different. No longer cold, no longer authoritative. It was frantic, breaking, filled with the raw fear of a father. "Sophia, what is she wearing? Hurry, what is she wearing?" "A pink dress," Grace answered. "Curly black hair, about 5 or 6 years old." She heard sharp, uneven breaths on the line, followed by a voice strained as if the man were fighting not to scream. "Do not let anyone touch her. Do not take your eyes off her. I am coming now." The call ended. Grace pulled the child closer and fixed her gaze on the door. 7 minutes. 7 long minutes that felt like a century. Then the screech of brakes tore through the rain, loud enough to cut through every sound in the diner. The door flew open as if kicked, and the man stepped inside. Gone was the ominous darkness she had seen earlier. Now he was a storm. His face was pale as paper, his eyes wild. His mouth pressed into a hard line. His expensive cashmere coat hung soaked around him. His black hair plastered to his forehead, but he seemed unaware of it. His deep black eyes swept the diner, and when they found Grace holding the small girl, something in his gaze shattered. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice strangled. "My daughter." Luca Moretti crossed the diner in 3 long strides, his polished shoes splashing through puddles without slowing. 2 bodyguards followed, but he had no need for them now. He needed no one except the child lying in the arms of a stranger. He knelt before Grace, and she saw his hands trembling, the hands of a kingpin, clear as throat, hands that had likely done terrible things, now shaking like leaves in a storm. "Sophia," he breathed so softly it was nearly a sigh. "Tesarum, Daddy is here. Look at me, sweetheart." The girl did not move. Her dark eyes still stared into the void, as if her spirit had drifted far from her small body. No blinking, no turning, no sign she heard the voice of her father. Luca lifted a hand, reaching to touch her cheek, but stopped midway. His fingers hovered, trembling in the air, as if he feared she might vanish at his touch. "Sophia," he called again, his voice cracking. "Sweetheart, please look at me." Nothing. Only those faint breaths and that empty stare. Grace watched his face change. The icy mask of authority broke apart, revealing a man collapsing inside himself. His deep eyes reined, his jaw clenched until the muscles twitched. And something bright and wet gathered at the corner of his eye that he fought desperately to hide. "Why will you not look at me?" he whispered, choked with pain. "Why will you not look at me?" Grace drew a steady breath. She knew she should not interfere. She was only a cheap diner waitress with no right to speak to a man like this. But she also knew something he clearly did not. "She is in shock," Grace said, her voice calmer than she felt. "Severe psychological shock. She may hear you, but she cannot respond. Her mind is protecting itself by shutting down." Luca lifted his gaze, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. "What do you know?" he asked, his voice sharp even as it trembled. "You are just a waitress. What do you know about this?" Grace did not flinch. She had looked into too many frightening eyes in her life to fear one more. "I grew up in foster care," she said quietly. 9 families in 15 years. I have seen children like this. I have been a child like this. After the fire that killed my parents, I did not speak for 3 months. Not because I did not want to, but because I could not." Luca stared at her and something shifted in his eyes. Not disdain, not suspicion. Something closer to desperation clinging to a lifeline. Then it happened. The tiny hand that had lain motionless all this time suddenly moved. The girl's small fingers slowly curled around the fabric of Grace's shirt and held on. Not tightly, but clearly intentionally. Both Luca and Grace froze. Sophia's eyes still stared into emptiness, but her hand gripped Grace as if afraid she might disappear. Luca looked at the small hand, then at Grace, his expression a mixture of pain and astonishment. "This is the first reaction she has had in hours," he said, his voice ragged. "She has not responded to anyone. Not the guards, not the doctors, not even me. But she responded to you." He rose, and as he straightened, his presence shifted back into something powerful and dangerous. But Grace had already seen what lay beneath. She had seen the broken father. "You are coming with me," he said, not as a question, but as a command. "Sophia needs you." "I cannot." Grace shook her head. "I have a shift. I have my life. I cannot just leave." Luca stepped closer, the scent of expensive cologne and rain surrounding her, his dark eyes locked onto hers with something sharp and unyielding. "Did you not hear what I said?" He murmured low and firm. "I am not asking. I am telling you. My daughter is holding on to you, and that is the first sign of life she has shown since she was nearly killed tonight. You will come with me. You will stay with her until she stabilizes, and I will pay you whatever you want." Grace looked down at the small hand gripping her shirt, then up into the eyes of the most dangerous man she had ever met. And she understood that she never truly had a choice at all. The black Mercedes slipped through the rain like a hunting creature piercing the dark. And inside, the scent of fine leather and the soft warmth from the heater wrapped around Grace as if she had stepped into an entirely different world. The plush seat cradling her body in a comfort almost foreign to someone accustomed to stiff plastic chairs and a sagging spring mattress. Sophia lay curled in her lap, her tiny hand still gripping the fabric of Grace's shirt, as though she feared Grace would vanish the moment she let go. And for the first time since Grace had found her out in the storm, those dark eyes slowly drifted shut, not fully asleep, but resting, allowing herself the smallest sliver of safety. Luca sat across from them, his back touching the seat, yet his entire body drawn tight like a wire. His gaze fixed on Grace and Sophia without a single blink, as if afraid that if he looked away even once, the two of them might dissolve into mist. In the dim light of the car, Grace could see more clearly the scar tracing from his temple down his cheek. An old wound healed, but carved permanently into his skin. "She was kidnapped tonight," Luca said, his voice low and rough, the words scraping out of him. "My enemies wanted to use her to threaten me. The guards rescued her, but there was gunfire." Grace felt Sophia flinch in her arms at the word, though her eyes remained closed. When she heard the gunshots, she ran. Luca continued, his voice tightening until it seemed to hurt him to speak. "She bolted from the vehicle and we could not find her. We searched everywhere and we could not find her." He stopped, his jaw clenching. 2 years ago, her mother died right in front of her, also to gunfire. She watched her mother being shot while holding her. Tonight, when she heard the gunshots, she thought it was happening again. Grace said nothing. She only held Sophia closer and felt the small heart pounding beneath the towel. The heart of a child barely 5 years old who had endured more than many adults would in a lifetime. And now this child lay in her arms, gripping her shirt as if Grace were the only lifeline in a vast black sea. The car stopped in front of a towering high-rise whose glass facade reflected the city lights like a scatter of stars. And Grace saw the gold letters on the front Moretti Tower. They entered the lobby where polished marble floors gleamed so brightly that Grace could see her own reflection. And the staff bowed as Luca passed, none daring to meet his eyes. The private elevator at the back required both a code and a fingerprint. And when the steel doors closed and the car began its ascent, Grace watched the numbers climb on the screen. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, until the doors opened and she stepped into a world she had only ever seen in movies. The penthouse was larger than the entire building where she lived. Its soaring ceiling crowned with a crystal chandelier that glittered like frozen tears. Its oak floors stretching toward enormous glass walls overlooking nighttime Chicago, where a million lights flickered like a blanket of stars. Its furnishings sculpted in leather and rare woods, its paintings, the kind she suspected were originals worth millions. And all of it steeped in the heavy silence of a space too vast for one man and his small child. Grace stood there barefoot on the warm wood, still wearing her stained rain-soaked diner uniform and holding a little girl wrapped in a towel from a cheap restaurant. And everything in the room told her she did not belong. From the chandelier overhead to the Persian rug beneath her feet, from the paintings on the walls to the glittering skyline beyond the glass. She was a blemish on a perfect canvas, an intruder from a world of burnt coffee and rancid grease. Yet Sophia still clung to her shirt. And because of that, Grace stepped deeper into the penthouse, into a world that was not hers, into the life of a Mafia kingpin and his shattered daughter. The private doctor arrived within 15 minutes. A silver-haired man with calm eyes and a black leather bag. Examining Sophia with care, checking her heartbeat, her temperature, her pupils, while the child lay limp in Grace's lap like a wax doll. No severe physical trauma, the doctor told Luca in a steady, professional voice. Mild hypothermia, but it has stabilized. The issue is psychological. She is in a dissociative state. The brain's way of protecting itself when facing a trauma too overwhelming to endure. She needs time, safety, and someone she trusts. His gaze flicked toward Grace as he said the last words. Luca nodded, his face carved from stone, though Grace saw his hands clench at his sides. After the doctor left, a middle-aged woman appeared carrying clean clothes for Sophia. Carla, the housekeeper. Luca said tersely. The woman looked at Grace with cool suspicion but remained silent. Sophia needs to be cleaned up. Luca said Carla will help. But when Carla stepped forward, Sophia recoiled and clutched Grace's shirt more tightly, her tiny knuckles widening. I will do it, Grace said, not asking permission, but stating fact. She does not want anyone else to touch her. Luca studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Sophia's bathroom was larger than Grace's entire studio apartment, its white tile gleaming, its marble tub deep and elegant, shelves lined with neatly arranged children's bath products. Grace ran warm water, adjusting the temperature with care, then gently unwrapped the towel from around Sophia. The child did not react as she was lowered into the warm bath, her dark eyes unfocused and distant. Grace scooped water in her hands and poured it over the tangled curls, working slowly to free each rain-soaked strand. Sweetheart, Grace whispered, her voice soft as breath. I know you are scared. I know you have seen terrible things, but you are safe now. No one can hurt you here. There was no response, but Grace did not give up. She bathed the little girl with a patience that felt like she had all the time in the world. Afterward, she dressed her in soft pale pink pajamas and carried her to the bed. Sophia's room looked like the dream of every young girl, with a white princess bed, lace curtains, and rows of stuffed animals lining the shelves. Yet there was an emptiness in the space, as though it had never truly been lived in, never warmed by laughter. Grace lay beside the child and pulled the covers over them both, and Sophia immediately curled into her, gripping her shirt as if afraid Grace might vanish into the night. Without thinking, Grace began to sing the old lullaby her mother had sung to her every night before the fire took everything away. Her voice rough from exhaustion and emotion, but the melody carrying softly through the quiet room. Sleep, little one. The gentle wind soothes you. Sleep, little one. Your mother is here. Though storms may rage and the night turn dark, do not be afraid, for I am always near. Grace did not know that Luca stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, unable to step inside. His dark eyes fixed on the sight before him with an expression he could not have named. Pain and relief and hope tangled together on a face usually cold as ice. For 2 years, ever since Elena died, Sophia had never slept like this. No nightmares, no midnight screams, no wide, terrified eyes staring into the dark. Only peaceful sleep with her small hand gripping the shirt of the stranger who had carried her out of the rain. Luca looked at Grace, the thin woman in a stained diner uniform, holding his daughter and singing in a hushed, weary voice. And in that moment, he understood that he would not let her go. Grace lay beside Sophia until she was certain the child had fallen into a deep sleep. Her breathing steady, her tiny hand slowly loosening its grip on the fabric of Grace's shirt. Her small face finally softening after so many hours of strain. Grace gently uncurled each little finger, then slid off the bed with painstaking slowness, holding her breath for fear of waking the girl. Sophia did not stir. Grace stood watching her for a long moment before stepping out of the room. The penthouse was silent as a museum at midnight. The chandelier dark, the only light coming from the city beyond the massive glass wall, washing everything in a silvery blue glow. And standing there, framed against that glass, was Luca. He had changed out of his soaked suit into a black shirt, a glass of amber liquor in his hand, his back turned, though Grace knew he was aware of her. A man like him always knew everything moving within his orbit. "She is asleep," Grace said, breaking the stillness. "For the first time in 2 years," he answered, his voice rough and tired. She slept without nightmares, no screaming, no trembling, no hours of me sitting by her bed, watching her shake with fear. Grace stepped closer, stopping a few paces behind him. Chicago spread out beneath them like a vast quilt of light. Millions of homes, millions of lives, millions of stories, and she stood above them all in the penthouse of a Mafia kingpin after the most surreal night of her life. "Why does she trust me?" Grace asked. "She does not even know who I am." Luca finally turned. His deep black eyes rested on her, and in the faint city glow the scar on his face looked like a fracture in marble. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I only know she has not reacted to anyone since her mother died. Not her grandmother, not the nannies, not the therapists, not even me." He paused, swallowing hard. "But she held your hand. She slept in your arms. She let you touch her. That is a miracle, Miss Sullivan, and I do not believe in miracles, but I do believe what I see." Silence stretched between them. Grace looked at her own hands, roughened by dish soap and labor, nails trimmed short. The hands of a broke diner waitress. Not the hands that should be touching the daughter of a mafia boss. "I want you to stay," Luca said. Not a request, but almost a command. "1 week until Sophia stabilizes." Grace shook her head. "I cannot. I have a job. I have a life. I have a sister in the hospital who needs me. I will pay you $10,000 a day." Grace froze, convinced she had misheard. No one paid $10,000 a day to a diner waitress to care for a child. But Luca's face was entirely serious. $10,000, he repeated. "Per day, 7 days, $70,000. You can do anything you want with that money. And my daughter can have the only person she trusts beside her when she needs it most." $70,000. The number swirled in Grace's mind like a storm. $70,000 was enough to cover Lily's medical bills, enough to keep her in a good hospital instead of being transferred out. $70,000 was nearly half of Grace's crushing student debt. $70,000 was a year's rent, a year of food, a year of hope. But it was also 7 days living in the home of a mafia kingpin. 7 days away from her real world. 7 days sinking into a life that was not hers. "I have conditions," Grace heard herself say, and even she was surprised by how calm she sounded. Luca tilted his head, waiting. "I need to call my sister every day. I need to know she is all right. And after 7 days, if Sophia is stable, I leave. No ties, no questions. I return to my life and you return to yours." Luca studied her for a long time, his black eyes unreadable. Then he nodded. "Agreed." He extended his hand. "We have a deal." Grace looked at that hand, the hand of a powerful man, a hand that had likely done terrible things, a hand trembling slightly now out of fear for his daughter. She placed her hand in his. His skin was warm and rough, nothing like the polished surface he presented to the world. And when his fingers closed around hers, Grace felt as though she had just signed a contract with the devil. But for Lily, for the sister dying slowly in a hospital bed, she would sell her soul to anyone offering the highest price. "Welcome to my world, Miss Sullivan," Luca said, and something in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "You will find it very different from anything you have ever known." The next morning, Grace woke in a room that was not hers. Sunlight slipping through thin silk curtains onto a king-sized bed dressed in cloud-soft white linens. She lay there a moment, disoriented before the memories of the night before crashed over her like a wave. The diner, the dangerous man, the child in the rain, the $10,000 a day agreement. Sophia still slept beside her, the small hand gripping her shirt just as it had through the night. Grace gently freed each tiny finger and slipped out of bed. The room Carla had brought her to the night before was larger than the studio apartment where she had lived for 5 years, with a private bathroom lined with marble, an empty wardrobe waiting to be filled, and a balcony overlooking the city. Everything was beautiful. Everything was expensive and none of it belonged to her. On the bedside table sat a brand new phone, its screen lit with a message from Luca. The money has been transferred. You may verify. Grace opened her banking app on her old phone and nearly dropped it. Her balance, which had been $42 after all expenses, now displayed $10,000. $10,000, 1 day's pay, more than she earned in 3 months of non-stop shifts. Hands shaking, Grace called the hospital where Lily was staying. I would like to pay the entire bill for patient Lily Sullivan, she said, her voice tight with disbelief. $15,000. Pay it in full. After the transaction cleared, she called Lily. Her younger sister answered on the second ring, her voice weak but steady. Grace, I got a notice the hospital bill was paid. Where did you get that money? You did not do anything reckless, did you? Grace felt tears burn her eyes but swallowed them back. I have a new job. She lied. Her tone so calm it startled her. The pay is very high. I will explain later. Just rest and focus on getting better. I will visit soon. When she hung up, Lily was still crying, but crying with relief instead of fear. And that alone made every impossible thing Grace was doing feel worthwhile. The days that followed drifted by like a strange dream. Grace stayed with Sophia nearly 24 hours out of 24. The girl still did not speak. Still did not respond to anyone else, but every time Grace left the room, those dark eyes followed her with quiet terror. Carla, the housekeeper, treated Grace with cool politeness, masking a deep disdain, looking at her as though she were a stain on the expensive Persian rugs, an intruder from a lower world. Grace did not blame her. She did not believe she belonged there either. But what began to trouble Grace was not Carla's stare. It was Vincent. The tall, broad-shouldered bodyguard was always nearby, no matter where she went in the penthouse. She stepped into the kitchen and Vincent stood in the doorway. She stepped onto the balcony and Vincent appeared behind her. She went into the bathroom and when she came out, Vincent was waiting. On the third day, Grace tried to go down to the lobby alone. She simply wanted to buy a cup of coffee from the little shop she had spotted through the window. Wanted to breathe air that did not come from inside this vast, suffocating penthouse. Vincent stopped her at the elevator. You are not permitted to go out alone, he said in a flat voice. Mr. from Moretti's orders. I just want coffee, Grace replied, trying to stay composed. I will get coffee for you, but you are not to leave the building without an escort. And even then, it will not always be allowed. Grace returned to her room, her chest heavy. She checked her phone and realized something chilling. Her call history had been viewed. Her messages had been read. Someone was monitoring everything she said, everything she did. She sat by the window, staring at the vast city of Chicago beneath her. Millions of people free to come and go while she remained locked inside a gilded cage on the 50th floor. Beautiful, luxurious, extravagant, but still a cage. And Grace began to wonder whether $70,000 was enough to buy her freedom, or whether she had unknowingly sold it for a price she could never reclaim. Grace witnessed Sophia eat for the first time since that terrible night. Sitting beside the little girl's bed with a warm bowl of porridge. Offering no pressure, no urging, simply lifting each small spoonful toward her lips and waiting. And miraculously those tiny lips parted. Sophia swallowing slowly, her dark eyes still empty, yet her small body beginning to accept life again. And Carla stood in the doorway watching, her gaze for the first time not entirely cold. On the third day, Sophia held Grace's hand from morning until night, refusing to let go, even in sleep. Her tiny fingers always searching for Grace, as though terrified that if she released her, Grace would vanish the way her mother had. And Grace let her hold on, let her follow her into the kitchen, out onto the balcony, into the bathroom. Let her curl beside her each night, listening to the steady breaths. and feeling the small heart beating against her own. By the fourth day, Grace realized she had stopped counting days. On the fifth day, everything changed. Grace was sitting on the rug in the living room, trying to draw a picture with pencil and paper Carla had reluctantly provided. Sophia beside her as always, silent and observant, watching Grace's rough-hand sketch. Watching the lines form on the page, and then without warning, a tiny voice broke the stillness. "Stay." Grace froze, convinced she had imagined it, that it was a noise drifting in from somewhere in the vast penthouse. But when she turned, Sophia was looking straight into her eyes, the dark gaze no longer vacant, but lit with the smallest spark of connection. "Stay," the child repeated, her voice from disuse, and tears spilled down Grace's cheeks before she could stop them. And she pulled Sophia into her arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, crying from relief, from joy, from the weight of a single word that felt as heavy as the world. She did not know Luca was standing in the hallway, watching his face unlike anything anyone had ever seen. No coldness, no authority, only a father witnessing his daughter speak her first word in 2 years. Astonishment and pain and hope flickering across his eyes in a brief moment before he gathered himself. But Grace had seen it. 1 week passed, then another. Sophia began speaking more, but only to Grace. A word, 2 words, sometimes a short sentence. "Where is she going?" "I am hungry." "Do not go." Whenever Grace mentioned leaving, those dark eyes filled with tears, and the small hand clutched her shirt so tightly the knuckles turned white. "Do not go," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "Do not go like Mama." And Grace could not walk out the door. One evening after Sophia had fallen asleep, Luca summoned her to his office, standing behind the massive oak desk, his dark eyes on her with something she could not decipher. "The 1-week agreement is over," he said. "I know," Grace replied. "But Sophia is not stable. You know that." "I know." "Then you will stay." It was a command. Yet his voice lacked the sharp edge it once carried, replaced by something almost pleading, though a man like Luca Moretti never begged. "Name your price," he said. "Anything you want, any amount. Just stay." Grace looked at him. The most powerful man in Chicago, standing before her and nearly pleading for the sake of his daughter, and she realized she no longer wanted to leave. 3 weeks passed since that stormy night. And Grace no longer counted days, no longer thought of the agreement or the money. She simply existed here beside Sophia, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. That evening, she prepared Sophia's bath as she did every night. The bathroom filled with warm steam and the scent of children's soap. The little girl sitting in the tub with her wet curls clinging to her small shoulders. Her dark eyes following the bubbles as they shimmered under the light. And it was Grace's favorite moment of the day. For Sophia always seemed most peaceful in warm water, as though it washed away nightmares and fear, leaving an ordinary 5-year-old child instead of a shattered soul. Grace was gently washing her hair when it happened. "Mama." A tiny voice rose. "Bubbles." Grace went still, her hands suspended in the air, her heart thundering in her chest. She must have misheard. Sophia had spoken more this past week. But never that word. Never. "Mama, look," Sophia said, lifting her small hand covered in soap bubbles, her dark eyes sparkling. "So many bubbles. Mama, look." "Sweetheart," Grace whispered, her voice trembling. "I am not your mama." "Your mama." Sophia tilted her head, studying Grace with a clarity that broke the heart. "Old Mama is gone," she said simply as if stating the weather. "Sophia remembers. Old Mama went to sleep and did not wake up. There was so much blood, but you are new Mama. You are here. You do not go. You are Mama." Tears burst from Grace's eyes before she could stop them, and she turned away, fighting the sob rising in her throat. A 5-year-old had just described her mother's death in the calmest tone imaginable, then named Grace her new mother, as though it were the most natural truth in the world. Grace did not know how to react. Did not know if she had any right to that name, for she was only a broke diner waitress, not a mother to anyone. "Sophia, you must understand," she tried to explain through a tight voice. I am only taking care of you for now. I am not your real mama. Your real mama is the woman in those pictures, the woman who loved you very much. And Upia is mama's daughter. The child said, firmly cutting her off. Sophia decided, you are mama. You cannot leave like old mama. You promise. Promise. Sophia. Grace could not speak. She pulled Sophia into her arms, letting the water soak her shirt, and cried. Cried because a single word had shattered her heart. Cried because she did not deserve this pure love. Cried because she knew that one day she would have to leave and break this fragile heart all over again. She did not know Luca was standing outside the bathroom door. He had heard everything. Old mama is gone. So much blood. You are new mama. The words pierced him like knives. Agony for what his daughter had witnessed. Relief that she had finally opened her heart to someone. Guilt that he had failed to protect his wife, failed to heal his daughter, and that now a stranger was doing what he could not. When Grace stepped out of the bathroom, eyes red, shirt soaked, she startled at the sight of Luca waiting. I did not mean to, she said quickly, panicked. I did not ask her to call me that. I will fix it. I will explain. I will tell her. Do not, Luca interrupted, his voice rough. Do not fix anything. Grace looked up at him, confused. 2 years, he said, his black eyes locked on hers. 2 years since Elena died, and Sophia has not called anyone mama. Not her grandmother, not the nannies, not anyone. She rejected them all. She pushed everyone away. He stepped closer. Close enough that Grace could smell his expensive cologne and something beneath it that was simply him. But she called you mama. After 2 years of silence, she chose you. Do not take that from her. Do not take yourself from her. I am only temporary. Grace whispered. I cannot stay forever. One day I will leave and she will. She stopped because Luca's hand was on her cheek, warm and rough and faintly trembling. She looked up into his eyes, and what she saw was no longer a cold, terrifying crime boss, but a broken man looking at her as though she were the last light in a long, dark tunnel. Then do not leave, he said, the words barely a breath. Stay. Do not leave. Grace's heart pounded beneath his touch, and she knew she should step back. Knew this was dangerous, more dangerous than living under the roof of a Mafia kingpin. Yet, she could not move. She could only stand there looking into his eyes, feeling something inside her begin to shift forever. After that moment, everything between them began to shift. Not suddenly, not in any clear way, but slowly, like a rising tide, gentle yet impossible to resist. And Luca began coming home earlier, began sitting at the dinner table with Grace and Sophia instead of eating alone in his office as he once had. The first meal was so tense, Grace could barely swallow. But Sophia sat between them babbling about the stuffed rabbit Grace had given her. And gradually the heavy silence dissolved. The second dinner easier. The third marked by Luca actually smiling when Sophia asked why Papa would not eat vegetables the way Mama made her eat them. And by the fourth, Grace realized she was waiting for the sound of his footsteps in the hallway each evening. In the quiet hours after Sophia was asleep, they began to talk. Not about money or the agreement or his work or her years in diners, but about deeper things. The hidden scars no one could see. One night, as they sat on the balcony watching Chicago glitter far below, Luca asked about her family, and Grace answered with a calmness born of too many retellings. Whispered only to herself, saying that she had no one left. That her parents died in a fire when she was 7. That she woke to the smell of smoke in a room filled with flames. That she heard her mother screaming in the next room. Tried to open the door, but the handle was burning hot. Beat her fists against it, cried, called her mother's name until the screaming stopped. And she knew her mother was gone. On. Luca said nothing, only listened. His dark eyes holding a depth she had never seen in anyone. Not pity, not fear, but understanding. And Grace went on saying a firefighter had pulled her out through a window. That she was the only survivor. That with no relatives to claim her, she entered foster care. Enduring 9 families in 15 years, where the only light she ever found was Lily. The first returning her after 2 months because she cried at night. The second taking her only for the subsidy. The third, and she paused, swallowing. Then said the fifth family was the worst. The foster father a drunk who liked using his belt. The foster mother pretending not to see. And she remained there 18 months until a teacher noticed the bruises on her back and called the police. In the darkness his hand found hers, warm and steady. No words, only presence. I am not telling you this for pity, Grace said, her voice firm. I am telling you so you understand why I know what Sophia feels. I was that child. I once looked at the world with empty eyes and trusted no one. I know what it is to lose a mother. Silence settled. Then Luca began to speak, his voice low and rough as though pulled from the deepest part of him, saying Elena's name like a prayer, saying he had met her when they were kids. He's 17 and she's 16. A girl from an ordinary family untouched by his world. A girl who sold flowers on a corner near his house. And he passed by each day just to see her smile. And he loved her at first sight. A wild, blind, dangerous love his father disapproved of because she did not belong to that world. But he married her anyway and swore to protect her from the darkness. And he failed. Grace tightened her hold on his hand as he continued, saying that 2 years ago, his enemies wanted to send a message. That they attacked while Elena was bringing Sophia home from school. That she was holding their daughter when the first bullet pierced her chest, passing through her and into Sophia's arm. That his 3-year-old child stood there soaked in her mother's blood, watching her fall and never rise again. And the tears streamed down Grace's face unchecked. I found them, Luca said, his voice turning to ice. One by one, I killed them myself. I made them beg, cry, call for their mothers the way my daughter called for Elena. But nothing brought her back. Nothing healed Sophia. He turned to Grace then, and in the soft city light, she saw his eyes were wet, and he whispered, I am a monster, Grace. I have killed people. I will kill again if anyone threatens what I love. But even monsters can love. Even monsters can break. She said nothing, only leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Two broken people sitting in the dark for the first time, not alone with their ghosts. The call came on the morning of the 4th day of the 5th week. Grace was feeding Sophia breakfast when her phone buzzed with Lily's name, and she answered with relief in her chest, eager to hear her sister's voice. But Lily did not sound relieved. Why have you not visited me? Lily asked weakly. I miss you. I called so many times and you did not pick up. Where are you? Guilt cut through Grace like a blade. She had called Lily every day, but those brief calls could not replace being there. I have a new job, Grace said gently. It is demanding, but pays well. I covered all your hospital bills, remember? Just rest. I will see you soon. Silence. And then Lily's trembling voice saying the doctor had told her kidneys were failing faster, that she needed a transplant within 6 months or she would die. And though she did not finish the sentence, Grace understood and she promised her sister she would find a way, told her to trust her. When the call ended, Grace set the phone down with shaking hands. Looking at Sophia eating quietly, looking at the luxurious kitchen surrounding her. And she felt herself drowning for all the money Luca paid. All the wealth around her, could not buy a kidney nor save her sister. She rose quietly, asked Carla to watch Sophia, and went into her bathroom, locking the door, sinking onto the cold tile and crying harder than she had since the night her parents died. Crying from helplessness, from despair, from the knowledge that her sister, the only person she had left, the only light in the darkness of foster care, was slipping away, and she could not save her. A soft knock came at the door. Mama. Sophia's voice floated through the frame. Mama, are you in there? Why is Mama sad? Why is Mama crying? Grace wiped her face, steadied her voice, and called back that she was fine, only tired. Telling Sophia to play with Carla, and after a moment, the small footsteps faded. Grace did not know Vincent had reported everything to Luca. Did not know Luca had heard her entire call through the surveillance system. She tried to forget existed. Did not know he had stood outside the bathroom, hearing her sobs, his fists clenching so tightly the knuckles blanched. That night, Luca summoned her to his office, and she entered with eyes still puffy, though she had tried to hide it, and found him standing behind his desk with an unreadable expression. Who is Lily? He asked. Grace froze. You listened to my phone call, she said, her voice shaking with anger. You promised I could call my sister every day, yet you still listened. I listened to everything in this house, Luca replied without apology. It is how I keep people alive. Now answer me. Who is Lily and why were you crying for her? Grace wanted to shout, throw something, walk out forever, but exhaustion and despair hollowed her out. My sister, she said softly. The only family I have. She has kidney failure and needs a transplant within 6 months. Without it, she will die, and I cannot do anything. I have all this money, but I cannot buy a kidney to save her. Silence filled the room before Luca stepped closer. I will find a kidney for her. Grace looked up, disbelieving. You cannot? The waiting lists are years long. No amount of money. I can do anything. Luca cut in without hesitation. You were there for my daughter when no one else could reach her. You gave her a voice, gave her hope, gave her a mother. This is what I can do for you. I will find a kidney for Lily. Trust me. Grace looked into his deep black eyes and saw sincerity there. Not empty promise, not pity, but the resolve of a man accustomed to turning the impossible into reality. And for the first time in weeks, she felt a faint spark of hope flicker within the darkness. In the days that followed, life settled into a strange rhythm Grace had never expected. And Luca kept his promise. For only 3 days after their conversation in his office, he informed her that he had found a compatible kidney donor for Lily, offering no explanation of how, no mention of cost, simply stating that it was done. And Grace did not ask, because she did not want to know what Luca had done to achieve the impossible in such a short time. She only knew her sister would live, and that knowledge alone filled her with a gratitude so profound she could not articulate it. Yet it carried with it something else, something dangerous, something burning quietly in her chest every time he was near. One afternoon, while Sophia napped, Grace sat by the living room window with the paper and pencil she had asked Carla for weeks ago. Drawing without intent, letting lines flow from her hand like water seeking its path. The Chicago skyline beyond the glass washed in late afternoon light, shadows falling across the tall buildings. And in the corner of her sketch, the faint silhouette of a man standing and looking out at the city. And she was darkening the lines when she felt someone watching her turning. She saw Luca behind her, his dark eyes fixed on the drawing. And she had not heard him arrive. A man so large moving with the silence of a cat. You have talent, he said, his voice low and sincere. Why did you not pursue it? Grace looked down at the paper, her fingers brushing its edge. I was accepted into the Art Institute of Chicago, she said, her voice distant as though speaking of another lifetime, a partial scholarship, and she had believed it was a dream come true. But then Lily became sick, and she had to choose between school and her sister. And she chose Lily, and would always choose Lily. Luca said nothing. Only looked at her for a long moment with an unreadable gaze before turning away. And Grace believed he had forgotten the conversation. But the next morning, she woke to find a large wooden box on her table inside the most expensive professional art supplies she had ever seen. Oil paints, watercolors, charcoal pencils, sable brushes, fine paper, a foldable easel, and dozens of items she had only ever dreamed about while standing outside the windows of art stores. And there was no note, no explanation. Only the understanding that Luca had listened, had remembered, had acted. Her heart raced as she touched the soft brushes, for no one had ever given her anything like this. No one had cared enough about her dreams to bring them to life, even in the smallest way. That night, unable to sleep, she stood on the balcony, staring out at the glittering city, trying to sort the chaos in her chest. And she was not surprised to hear footsteps behind her, Luca standing beside her with a glass of whiskey, his eyes on the night. Neither of them spoke for a long time, only the wind and the distant hum of the city between them, until Grace finally asked, her voice barely a breath. Why me? Out of everyone, why did Sophia choose me? Why do you trust me? Luca did not answer immediately. He took a sip of whiskey and kept his gaze on the dark horizon before saying, because you are real. You do not want my money or my power or anything from me except fairness. You are not afraid of me. Not truly. Even though you know who I am and what I have done, you look at me as a man, not a monster." He turned toward her then, and in the muted city glow, the scar on his face stood out like a reminder of violence and shadow. "Do you think I am a monster, Grace?" She met his deep black eyes and thought of Elena, of Sophia, of the men he had killed with his own hands. Thought of how he looked at his daughter, at her, with a tenderness no one would expect from a Mafia kingpin. Thought of the hands that had taken lives, but had also held hers in the darkness when she shared her past, and she did not answer. Instead, she lifted her hand and touched the scar on his cheek, his skin warm beneath her fingertips, his body trembling faintly at the contact. "Luca," she whispered. Only his name, nothing more. And it was as though that single word unlocked a door both of them had struggled to keep closed. And he leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to step back, to refuse, to run. But Grace did not move. And when his lips touched hers, she closed her eyes. The kiss so gentle it was barely real. As though he feared she might break if he pressed harder, as though she were the most precious thing he had ever held. And when he pulled away, looking at her with something close to reverence, Grace knew she had crossed a line she could never return from. After that kiss, everything between them changed in ways Grace had never imagined. Luca no longer keeping a polite distance. His touch trailing across her back as he passed, his fingers slipping into her hair, his lips brushing her forehead as she fed Sophia. And during the nights they lay beside each other. She felt the warmth of his body surround her like a blanket. And she wondered how only weeks earlier she had been a broke waitress in a greasy diner, now sleeping in silk sheets in the arms of one of the most powerful men in Chicago, called Mama by a child who loved her. Happiness was the word she did not dare to use. Yet it crept into her mind each time Sophia laughed. Each time Luca looked at her as if she were the center of his universe. But that happiness carried something suffocating. For Luca still controlled everything. She still could not leave the building alone. Vincent still shadowed her every step. Her phone still monitored. Every call, every message, every word recorded and reported. And some nights Luca left the bed at 3 o'clock in the morning for calls he never explained. Returning with eyes like ice and fists clenched. And Grace knew there were parts of his world she would never be allowed to touch. One night she woke to see him changing his shirt in the dim moonlight, the white fabric stained red blood, and he saw her see it. Yet neither spoke. He tossed the shirt aside, climbed into bed, and wrapped her in his arms as though nothing had happened. And Grace lay against him, smelling gunpowder beneath the expensive cologne, wondering what kind of man she was in love with. In the 7th week, Lily called to say the transplant surgery was scheduled for the following week. And Grace wanted to visit her, wanted to see her face, hold her, tell her everything would be all right. But when she told Luca, he refused, saying it was too dangerous, saying she could not go outside now, saying he would bring Lily here if she wished to see her. And Grace answered that she did not want her sister drawn into this world. That Lily did not need to know about any of this. About him, about this life, and she wanted to go to the hospital. Wanted to be with her sister before the surgery. And he said one word, final, absolute, no, as though speaking to a stubborn child rather than the woman sharing his bed. And something inside Grace ignited. "I am not your prisoner," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You have no right to keep me here. I came for Sophia, for, snorts, our agreement, but I am not your possession, not something you can control." And Luca replied that she was being protected, that it was different. And she stepped closer, looking straight into his eyes, asking whether it truly was different, because from where she stood, it looked exactly the same. She could go nowhere, see no one, do nothing without his permission. And he called it protection. She called it captivity, his jaw clenched, the muscles twitching beneath his skin. And he growled that she did not understand that there were men out there who would hurt him by hurting those he loved. That Elena had died because he had not been careful enough. And he would not let that happen to Grace or Sophia. And she asked whether she was meant to live like this forever. Trapped in a gilded cage, beautiful yet still a cage. asked whether this was his love for her, control and confinement, and heavy silence filled the space between them as he looked at her. Pain and fear and a deep obsession flickering in his eyes, an obsession she was not sure she could live beside. "I love you," he said, his voice ragged. "That is the only truth I know. But I cannot lose you, and I will do anything to keep you safe, even if you hate me for it." And Grace looked at him, the man she loved and the man imprisoning her. And she understood that Luca's love was not ordinary love, but obsession, fear disguised, a force that might burn them both to ashes if they could not find a way out. The argument between them had not yet cooled when the real storm broke. The next morning, as Grace was feeding Sophia in the kitchen, she heard a scream from Luca's office. Not an ordinary scream, but the wounded roar of a wild animal filled with fury and something like pure fear. Followed by the sound of destruction, glass shattering, wood splintering. Something heavy and metallic thrown against a wall. And Sophia shrank into herself, her dark eyes wide with terror as Grace pulled her into her arms. Whispering that everything was all right, even though her own heart was pounding wildly. Telling the child that Papa was only angry. And that nothing was wrong, though everything was terribly wrong. Which Grace understood the moment Vincent appeared at the kitchen doorway with a face usually carved from stone. Now pulled tight as a wire, telling her she needed to go to the bedroom immediately. To take Sophia with her, to stay inside until further orders. And when Grace asked what was happening, Vincent had already turned away without answering. She carried Sophia into the girls' room, locked the door as instructed, and sat in the dark with her heart beating like a drum. 1 hour passing, then 2, Sophia falling asleep in her lap from exhaustion after her fright. While Grace listened to the rush of footsteps, low voices, doors opening and closing. The whole penthouse trembling with the sense that something terrible had happened. At last, the door opened and Luca stepped inside. Looking like a man transformed, his eyes bloodshot, his hair disheveled. His hand injured with dried blood caked across his knuckles as though he had struck something over and over until his skin tore. And when Grace whispered his name, afraid of waking Sophia, and asked what had happened, he did not answer, but hurled a photograph onto the bed. She picked it up and felt her blood run cold. For it was a picture of her and Sophia taken from inside the penthouse. Capturing her seated on the floor, showing the child a drawing. The afternoon light pouring through the glass and bathing them in gold. A moment private and peaceful and intimate. Photographed by someone she had never seen. And on the back was a single handwritten line in ink the color of blood. "She is beautiful, the child, too. How much are they worth to you, Moretti?" And Grace whispered that someone had gotten inside. Someone had been in the home watching them without their knowing. And Luca nodded, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles in his face twitched, saying one of the household staff had been bribed, had been dealt with. And Grace did not ask what dealt with meant because she did not want to know. And then Luca said the Valentino family had discovered her existence. That they knew she mattered to him and to Sophia. And they would use her the same way they had used Elena. And nausea rose in Grace as she stared at the photo. At her own face and Sophia's, understanding for the first time how truly dangerous her position had become. That she was no longer merely a caretaker, but a target. From now on, Luca said in a voice that allowed no argument. She was not to leave the bedroom, not to step on the balcony, not to approach the windows, not to be alone even for a moment. Saying it was a pity their reunion would be short. Grace shoved Sophia into the safe room and stepped between the child and the intruder, unarmed, untrained. With nothing except the raw instinct of a mother defending her child because she would not let him touch Sophia, even if it cost her life. The man stepped closer, the faint glow from the keypad casting sharp lines across his scarred face. And he did not hurry, did not appear alarmed. Walking with the slow confidence of someone taking a stroll in a quiet park instead of invading the heart of his enemy's home. Dominic Valentino, the name Grace had heard Vincent mention, the eldest son of the Valentino family, Luca's sworn enemy, the man behind the assassination of Elena 2 years earlier. "Move aside, Miss Sullivan," Dominic said. His voice smooth as honey, though his eyes were cold as ice. Telling her he had no quarrel with her, that he only needed the child. That the little girl would make a fine gift for Moretti, piece by piece. And Grace did not move, her legs trembling but refusing to step back, shielding Sophia with her own body while behind her the child cried without sound, clutching her shirt with desperate fingers. "You punk y'all have to walk over my body," Grace said, her voice shaking but firm. And Dominic laughed, a sound hollow and cruel echoing down the dark hallway, shrugging as he told her he had no objection to adding one more corpse. And then he lunged faster than she expected, giving her just enough time to shove Sophia deeper into the safe room before his hand seized her hair and yanked. Pain exploding across her scalp as if her skin were tearing. And she screamed as she clung to the doorframe, clawing his face, her nails carving a long line across his cheek, blood beating instantly. Dominic roared in fury and punched her, the world bursting into 1,000 stars as she hit the floor, her head striking hard, the taste of blood filling her mouth. But she did not stay down, grabbing his ankle and pulling hard enough to make him stumble. And Dominic kicked her once, twice, her ribs cracking beneath the blows. Pain so sharp she could not breathe. Yet she refused to let go because Sophia was behind her. Because the child had called her mama, because Grace had promised she would not leave her like the child's mother had. Dominic finally tore free and stepped over her like discarded trash, moving into the safe room while Grace tried to rise. Her body unresponsive, blood running from her forehead, nose, the corner of her mouth, everything blurring and spinning. "Sophia," she whispered, barely audible. "Run, hide." But there was nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. Only one entrance to the safe room. And Dominic was already inside. And Grace heard Sophia scream, "No, Mama, let me go. Mama, help. No, no, no." And something inside Grace ignited. Not physical strength, but something primal, feral, the instinct of a mother defending her child. She launched herself upright on sheer will, ignoring the agony, the blood, the broken ribs, and hurled herself into the safe room where Dominic held Sophia. One hand tangled in the girl's hair, the other holding a blade against the tiny throat. "Let her go!" Grace screamed, her voice ripping from her chest. And Dominic turned with disbelief in his eyes, astonished she was still standing. Calling her a stubborn parasite before saying it didn't matter that she could watch him slit the child's throat before she died. "Mama." Sophia sobbed. Her dark eyes overflowing, telling Grace she was scared. That she didn't want to sleep like Mommy, begging Mama to save her. And Grace's heart shattered into pieces as the 5-year-old spoke of death as casually as sleep. Remembering her mother's fall, her mother's blood, and now facing the same fate, Grace attacked Dominic with nothing but desperation and love, biting into his wrist hard enough to taste blood. And Dominic screamed, releasing Sophia. "Run!" Grace shouted, struggling against him. "Fine, Papa." But Sophia did not run, frozen with terror, just as she had been the night her mother died. Unable to move, unable to think, only able to watch. Whispering Papa in a voice as thin as thread, Dominic slammed Grace to the floor again. His hand closing around her throat, squeezing, cutting off her air as the edges of the world dimmed as she saw Sophia crying and calling to her from a distance as if underwater. And then something happened. A shadow tore into the room like a storm unleashed. And Dominic was ripped away from her. Grace coughing violently as air crashed back into her lungs, rolling to the side just in time to see Luca. He was there drenched in blood. His face a demon's mask. His dark eyes burning with pure rage as he attacked Dominic. Not with a gun, but with his bare hands, punching and punching without pause. Blood spraying, bones breaking, refusing to stop. Hitting until Dominic no longer resembled anything human. Until there was nothing left to strike. Grace watched, unable to look away. Knowing Luca was dangerous, knowing he killed. But seeing it with her own eyes was different. Witnessing the raw brutality, the unrestrained violence. The hands that held her so gently now crushing a man's skull. When Luca finally stopped, breath ragged, his body trembling, he turned toward Grace and Sophia, the wildness in his eyes slowly fading into clarity. And she saw fear there. Not fear of enemies, but fear that she now saw what he truly was. "Luca," Grace rasped, her voice shredded from being choked. And he came to her, kneeling beside her, his blood-stained hands shaking as they touched her face, whispering her name like a prayer, asking if she was hurt, if she was safe. Just as Sophia threw herself at both of them, sobbing, "Papa. Mama, the bad man is gone. He won't hurt Mama Sophia anymore." And Luca wrapped his arms around them both, his whole body shuddering as if he had just faced the greatest terror of his life, which perhaps he had. The penthouse was ruined, glass blown out. Night wind cutting through gaping wounds in the walls. The polished oak floors smeared with blood and debris. Priceless furniture overturned and shattered. Bodies of attackers and Luca's own men strewn across the space. 4 guards dead, 6 gravely injured, and Vincent alive, but wounded by 2 bullets and a broken arm. Taken to emergency care as Grace was carried to a temporary bedroom on the lower floor. Luca's private doctor arrived within 10 minutes. Examining her, stitching the gash on her forehead with 7 stitches. Binding her cracked ribs, giving her pain medication. Diagnosing a mild head injury, bruised throat. And a body covered in contusions, but she would live. Sophia had no physical injuries, but her spirit was another matter. The child sitting beside Grace with dark eyes hollow as the night they first met. Her small hand clinging to Grace's shirt, silent, not crying, not speaking, staring into nothing. The doctor calling it shock again. Trauma layered upon trauma, warning it could take weeks, months. Maybe she would never fully recover. And Grace held the child despite the pain, singing the old lullaby her mother had once sung, her voice raw but steady because it was all she could offer. Luca sat in a chair beside the bed, head bowed, fingers locked together. He had changed into clean clothes and washed away the blood. Yet Grace still saw it under his nails, in the cracks of his skin. Blood that would never truly wash away, and the room was silent for hours until Sophia finally fell asleep, her breathing steady, though her hand never loosened its grip on Grace's shirt. And in that hush, Luca finally spoke, saying he had almost lost them both. Almost watched Elena happen again. Almost watched the woman he loved die before him while he stood helpless. Grace said nothing, watching him, the most powerful man in Chicago, hunched on a chair like a terrified child, his scar pale under the dim light, his dark eyes filled with guilt and grief. And she said softly that this was the life he chose. Violence and blood and enemies, the world he built, that he had always known something like this could happen. "I didn't choose you," Luca whispered, lifting his red-rimmed eyes to hers. "You happened. You walked into that cheap diner. You saved my daughter. You looked at me like I was a man instead of a monster. I didn't choose to love you. It just happened. And now I cannot exist without you." He rose, stepped to the bed, and knelt on the floor. The Mafia king kneeling before a poor diner waitress with his head bowed and shoulders trembling. Begging her not to leave, admitting he was unworthy. Admitting he had imprisoned her, controlled her, dragged her into danger. That he knew all of it, and still he was asking her. Pleading with her not to go, saying he would do anything. Change anything, if she would stay. Grace looked at the man kneeling before her, the man who had killed with his bare hands to protect her, the man who had controlled and confined her, the man who loved her in a way both wrong and dangerous. And she realized she loved him, too. Loved him so deeply it hurt. Loved him so profoundly she could not tell if it was salvation or a curse. Sophia stirred in her sleep, her small hand tightening around Grace's shirt as she murmured, "Mama. Don't go." And Grace looked at the child, then at the man. 2 broken souls clinging to her like a lifeline. And she understood that whatever choice she made, her heart would never be whole again. Grace did not answer that night. She needed time, needed to think, needed to lie beneath the dim ceiling and ask herself what her heart truly wanted. Sophia slept beside her, and Luca sat in the chair, keeping watch through the long hours without closing his eyes once. While Grace lay there aching from the wounds on her body and the wounds inside her, weighing every possible choice. She could leave. Luca would let her go. She knew that after tonight, after everything that had happened, he would no longer force her to stay. She could return to her shabby studio apartment, to her diner shifts, to a life small and invisible and safe. But she would be leaving Sophia behind. The little girl who had called her mama and clung to her shirt as if Grace were the only thread tying her to the world. She would be leaving Luca. The man who had killed to protect her. The man who had fallen to his knees and begged her not to walk away. Could she do that? Could she step out of this door and pretend the last 2 months had never happened? The answer was no. Grace knew that deep inside herself. She had come to love them, both of them, with a kind of love she never imagined she was capable of feeling. But she also could not live as she had been living. She could not remain in a gilded cage, even if that cage had been built with diamonds and love. When the first morning light filtered through the temporary bedroom window, Grace finally spoke. "I will stay." Luca lifted his head, his eyes red from a sleepless night sparking with hope. But Grace raised a hand to stop him from speaking. "But everything has to change," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "Not a little, completely. And if you do not agree, I will leave immediately without looking back." "Anything," Luca said at once. "I will do anything you ask." Grace looked straight into his eyes. "First, Sophia needs therapy. Real therapy with a specialist in childhood trauma. Not the superficial sessions she had before, but a serious long-term treatment until she is truly healed." Luca nodded. "Second, Sophia needs to go to school," Grace continued. "A real school with children her age, with teachers and a life that resembles normally, because he could not keep her in a bubble forever. The child needed to learn how to live in the world, how to face fear, how to grow stronger." "Security risks," Luca began, but Grace cut him off. "They can be managed. You are Luca Moretti. You control anything you choose to control. You can choose the safest school. Arrange the most discreet protection. Do whatever is necessary, but she must go to school." Silence. Then another nod from Luca. "Third, I need to see my sister," Grace said, her voice softer but still firm. Lily's transplant was approaching. She needed to be there for her to live at least a portion of her life like a normal human being. To step outside, to breathe, to exist beyond the limits of a cage. Luca looked at her and she saw the battle in his eyes, fear of losing her clashing with the desire to make her happy. He swallowed and nodded. "Alessandra will accompany you," he said. "But you can go." And finally, Grace drew a slow breath. "The most important part. You need therapy." Luca froze, but she continued before he could object. "Your need for control, your obsessive protectiveness, the way you love by imprisoning. None of that is healthy. It is fear disguised as devotion. It is trauma from losing Elena. A wound you never allowed to heal. And if you do not confront it, it will destroy us." "I do not need," he began. But Grace interrupted gently yet firmly. "You do. I grew up in foster care. I know what it is to be controlled, confined, stripped of freedom. I will not live like that ever again. Not with anyone, no matter how much I love them. You need to learn to trust me, to believe I can protect myself. To believe I will not disappear if you stop holding on so tightly. And that requires time and professional help." Silence stretched between them. Luca looked at her with dark eyes full of emotions she could not decipher. Then he rose, walked to her bedside, and knelt once more. Not to plead this time, but to vow. "I agree," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Everything. Therapy for Sophia, school for her, freedom for you, and therapy for me. I will do it all for you. Only for you." He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. "But promise me one thing. Promise you will stay. Promise you will not leave. Promise you will give me the chance to change, to become the man worthy of you." Grace looked at the man kneeling before her, and she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Hope. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope. "I promise," she whispered. "I will stay. We will do this together as partners, as a family." Sophia stirred beside her, her dark eyes opening with fragile hope. "Mama stays?" she asked in a tiny voice. "Papa not sad anymore. Mama stays?" Grace said, gathering the child into her arms. "And Papa will try not to be sad. We will all try, the three of us, like a family." Luca held them both, and for the first time, Grace felt his arms not as a cage, but as a refuge. 6 months passed like a dream she hardly dared believe was real. The changes came slowly, quietly, but profoundly. Luca went to therapy each week with a trauma specialist, returning from the first sessions tense and raw, his eyes rimmed with red. But he did not quit. Week after week, he confronted the ghosts of his past, and week after week, a small part of him healed. Sophia began attending a private preschool with a discreet security system Luca spent months building. The first day he prowled the penthouse like a caged animal, barely containing himself. But when Sophia returned with bright eyes and breathless stories about her new friend, Emma, and a picture she had drawn for her teacher, Luca understood he had made the right choice. Grace visited Lily and stayed through the transplant surgery, which was successful. Lily healed quickly and now lived in a safe apartment Luca purchased for her, studying nursing as she had always dreamed. The sisters met each week, and every time Grace saw Lily's healthy smile, she silently thanked the stormy night that had brought her into the path of the most dangerous man in Chicago. Grace found herself again. She had her own studio in the penthouse, where light poured through the glass, and she painted for hours, creating canvases about darkness and light, pain and healing, love found in unexpected places. A small gallery in downtown Chicago agreed to host her first exhibition, Light from the Shadows. And on opening night, Luca stood beside her, pride radiating from his dark eyes as she shone among the crowd. One warm spring evening, as the city's branches began to bud, Luca led her to the balcony where they had shared their first kiss, where they had revealed their deepest wounds, where they had shattered and rebuilt each other. He did not kneel. There was no diamond ring the size of a fist, no elaborate gesture, only the two of them beneath the stars, and Luca holding her hands with the gentleness of a man who once stained them with blood. "Marry me," he said, his voice rough and trembling. "I know I am not perfect. I am still learning to trust, still learning to let go, still learning to love without imprisoning. But I want to spend the rest of my life learning those things with you. Marry me so I can spend my life proving you are right to give me a second chance," Grace cried. Not from sadness, but from a fullness so tender it overflowed. And when she nodded and he kissed her, she knew she had found home. The wedding was held in the penthouse in the summer, small and intimate. Lily cried throughout the ceremony. Vincent, fully recovered, served as best man with a rare smile. Carla, who once viewed Grace with cold suspicion, wiped tears as she watched her walk in a simple white dress. And Sophia, the little girl who had once been silent and shattered, scattered rose petals with the brightest smile Grace had ever seen. When Luca slipped the ring onto her finger, he whispered a word that had once terrified her, "Mine." But now, it was no longer a chain. It was a promise, a belonging, a home. 1 year later, Grace stood on the familiar balcony with her hand on her 6-month belly. While inside the penthouse, Sophia chattered excitedly, showing Vincent her newest drawing, her voice light as bird song. Luca stepped behind her, his arms circling her waist, his hand resting tenderly over the child growing within her. "What are you thinking?" he murmured into her hair. Grace smiled at the sparkling city below, thinking about the 27-year-old waitress who had once felt invisible, who believed her life was nothing more than endurance instead of living. Who would never have imagined that one stormy night, one phone call, and one trembling child could change everything? "I was thinking that I used to fear being caged," she said softly. "I used to believe your love was a prison. But now I understand. Sometimes the cage is not meant to confine, but to protect. And when the one who built it loves enough to open the door, it becomes a nest instead." Luca held her tighter, and she felt the steady beat of his heart against her back. No longer wild or fearful, but calm. "I am Grace Moretti," she whispered into the night. And for the first time in her life, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. Below them, Chicago glittered like a field of stars. Inside, Sophia laughed and called, "Mama, look at this." And in the arms of the man who had once been a monster, but had learned how to become human, Grace finally found what she had searched for across 20 years. Home. Not made of walls, but of hearts woven together, holding fast and refusing to let go. Our story ends here. A story of love found in unlikely places. of healing for shattered souls, of how the most beautiful things sometimes grow from the darkest nights. The lesson Grace and Luca leave us is that true love is not control or possession, but trust. And the willingness to change for the one you love. The courage to open the cage door and believe the other will choose to stay. The grace to accept each other's past and build a future together. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video so more people can hear meaningful stories each day. We would love to know how you felt about Grace and Luca's journey. Have you ever met someone who changed your life in unexpected ways? Do you believe people can change for love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every message and treasure every word from your hearts. Thank you for listening until the very end. May you have good health, joy, and love each day. And no matter how difficult life becomes, may you find your own light, just as Grace found hers on that fateful stormy night. Goodbye.